Welcome to the Genealogy Gems podcast, providing quick and innovative ways to make the absolute most out of your research time and creative ideas for sharing and displaying your family history. I'm your host, Louise Cooke. Welcome to the Genealogy Gems podcast, episode number 121. And this is part 2 of my interview with the Washington Post editor, Steve Luxenberg, author of Annie's Ghosts. From the emails, tweets, and the Facebook posts that I've received from so many of you, it sure looks like that you enjoyed part 1 of the interview, which appeared in episode 120, as much as I enjoyed doing it. Now, Jenna over at the Seeking Surnames blog tweeted, "The Annie's Ghosts podcast was great, and it's a close runner-up to the Sha Na Na Guy as my favorite." Well, Jenna is referring to Dr. Robert Leonard, and I interviewed him in episodes 89 and 90 about the topic of forensic linguistics. And I have to agree, Dr. Leonard is one of my all-time favorite guests as well, but Steve is certainly up there with him. And you'll remember that I introduced part 1 by reading the email from Jay in New York. Well, after listening to episode 121, Jay sent me a follow-up email saying, "Awesome interview with Steve Luxenberg about his book, Annie's Ghosts. It hit the nail right on the head. Thank you." Steve is such a riveting writer and speaker, and it's fascinating to hear how someone who is not a genealogist, but rather a journalist, approached his family history search in an effort to find the answers to mysteries in his family. I am so excited to share part 2 of this interview with you. So we're going to just skip past the genealogy news and the mailbox, and we're going to get right to it. So here is part 2 of my interview with the author of Annie's Ghosts, Steve Luxenberg. You know, with all the incredible secrets that you unearthed, and I think that, they're just fascinating to follow. They're interesting in themselves, but I have to say, I think that you really did a tremendous job in the book bringing us along with you for the hunt, because as family historians, we love the hunt. And of course, you can find all the great information that you want, but if you can't tell the story, it just kind of falls flat. So I would love to have you share with us some advice about the good storytelling that you did, and things that family historians can do to take it beyond names and dates, and really, because everybody in the end, it seems like, would like to be able to publish something. They'd like to get something out, even if it's just for their own family. But even then, oftentimes your own family members don't pick something up unless there's a good story involved. What would you say, what kind of advice would you give to people listening on how to keep the story in mind while you're trying to tell your family history?
Well, what's the enemy of good storytelling? I would say that the enemy is too much detail.
Yes.
And yet, the telling detail, that one shining detail can often make a dull story into a great story. So I look for telling details and try to remember to leave out the details that are not telling. The other thing is that for some people, you're not going to please everybody. Not everybody likes the same kinds of stories. Mm-hmm. There's some people who love the so-called police procedurals that you see on television, or, you read mysteries or whatever, and other people who find them boring. So if you're not interested in the step-by-step in other ways, you're probably not going to be all that interested in a step-by-step in any kind of a hunt. But what I try to keep in mind is that it's people and their stories, their ways of telling stories, I have a little note above my writing space, and you're going to laugh when I tell you this, but it just says taste, smell, touch, hearing, sight.
Yeah.
In other words, I try to remind myself that one of the best ways to tell a story is to remember that those senses that we bring with us every day are the same things that make a story come alive.
Oh, that's so true.
And if you're writing a story and you don't remember to include what it smelled like,
Mm-hmm.
and how would you know unless you ask? And then you might say, "What are you talking about, Steve? I don't smell when I tell a story," but you do. I mean, you remember, the day it felt fresh, or it was rainy, or it was damp, or it was moldy, or whatever. We can go on about the ideas. It's not important. But whenever I can, I try to remember to ask. Try to remember to read if I can find it in letters, etc. I was just looking at the diaries of a woman who lived in the 19th century who's relevant to the new book I'm working on, and every entry began with the weather. Now, it was boring to read it, one after the other. But I'm not going to do it but once, but one of those days that I'm going to describe in her life, I'm going to really need to know the weather. And so I'm grateful that she put it down, because otherwise I'd have to go to the 19th century newspapers for the town that she was living in, and I'm not sure I would trust that the weather was reported accurately. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm,
So it's firsthand. And of course, I'm going to put it in her voice. I'm not going to say that the weather was just something. I'm going to say, that she remembered that she wrote down that the weather was something. So, storytelling is, a lot of people think they don't have the gift for telling a story, and of course, some people have the gift more than others. But if you remember that telling a story is best done chronologically, and if you remember that it's the telling detail that really matters, I think you'll be all right. A friend of mine once started a book talk by quoting E.M. Forster, the British novelist, who once said that if the king dies and then the queen dies, that's chronology. But if the king died and then you say that the queen died of a broken heart, that's a plot.
Yeah. Oh, so true. Well, and when you mentioned, you were talking about Anna's voyage from Redswillow, and she went into Germany and then she comes to America, and what it would have been like being on the ship. You gave some details about the smells and the sights and the sounds, and it's almost you're telling it in words, but it evokes kind of memories and images that are almost nonverbal. You just really have a sense of what that must have felt like. It does put you in touch with that person's feelings, doesn't it?
Well, you picked up on something really, really important there, because it's a technique that I used, and I was very lucky. My grandfather, like many immigrants, came over in steerage on a ship in 1907, and I was able to track down the passenger manifest to show that I knew what ship he came in on and all that. But I had no stories from him about what that voyage was like.
Right.
And I did not want to make it up. I didn't want to put it, in his. I didn't want to. Obviously, I couldn't make it up, but it's a nonfiction book. It's not a novel. But I didn't want to be thwarted by that. So I had to figure out ways that I could tell you what it was like, and yet not have you feel like I was reaching for something that wasn't there. So I thought about this, and I discovered that in 1911. Actually, after several years of investigation, the Congress had put out a 42-volume, most of it was statistics, but 42-volume investigative report on the overseas travel that immigrants were going through. And they had done something quite unusual at the time, which was that they had gone undercover. They had sent congressional investigators to act as passengers in steerage so that they could experience firsthand what it was like. Now, that's not a substitute for interviewing people, but it is an easy way. Well, as it turned out, one of those investigators had taken a ship, not the ship that my grandfather took, but she had taken, it was a she had taken the same company's line from the same port to New York, from Hamburg to New York.
Right.
In the same year that my grandfather had come. So I felt that I could use her experience, not by putting my it would have been great for a novel. I just told you her story. I said, she took this, it was probably the same as my grandfather. If you don't believe that, then that's up to you. But I think it's legitimate to say that. I wrote in the book. And so that's how I did that. That's the kind of thing you can do when you're writing a story that is legitimate. I think most readers, I can't imagine that there were even a handful of readers who thought that somehow I had done something that was unfair because I had disclosed it all. I told you who it was. I told you when she traveled. I told you it wasn't my grandfather traveling. But her story, the amount of space that she had, the bunk that she had where she had to put her personal belongings, her account of what it smelled like, etc. All that became very evocative. And I just felt incredibly fortunate to have uncovered. I wasn't the first person to obviously read that report. I'm just saying to have discovered that substitute for my grandfather's experience.
I thought it was perfect for what you were trying to do. You gave just the right amount of it. And as you said, sometimes we can look for the substitutes when we don't have it ourselves. And yet you you kind of bridged it, because you would say, okay, well, this bunk is 4 feet by 2 feet. And here's how tall my grandfather was. And immediately I envisioned your grandfather trying to, get on a bunk, or what a full-grown man might look like on a bunk like that. Now, I think your grandfather was a child at the time, but you really helped us bridge that information that they were sharing in the report to what does that mean for what we know about my ancestor. And it was riveting, I thought.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned my grandfather at the time would have been, I don't know if he was as tall as he was when he probably was, because he was 20 years old. But showing it sometimes, that I always like to show these slides because my PowerPoint, because it makes us laugh at ourselves. So I'm trying to vacuum up all of the documents I possibly can. And I get my grandfather's alien registration form for 1940. Now, your listeners, some of you may know that in 1940, the Congress passed a law requiring all people who weren't citizens to file this alien registration form as World War II was breaking out in Europe. So I got my grandfather's from then the INS, or I guess by now it was the CIS, but the Immigration Service. Mm-hmm. And I look at the form included, what ship did you come over on? And it said he came over on the Fatherland on July 4th, 1910. Very patriotic arrival.
Yeah.
Except that I already had his manifest, and he had come over on June 20th, 1907. So I thought, well, maybe he left, came back. I have no evidence of that. So I kept looking and looking. So, of course, I get the Fatherland's manifest, because I know what date it supposedly traveled and when it arrived, and he was supposed to be on it. Well, first of all, the Fatherland didn't have a voyage landing in New York on July 4th, 1910, or anywhere else. And my grandfather's name wasn't on the manifest.
Right.
So I was completely buffaloed by this. So I happen to have had a couple of email exchanges with Marion Smith, the historian of the CIS. So I emailed her and I said, Miss Smith, what is this? What's going on here? And she emailed back and said, I've done a lot of research into these alien registration forms. I can't tell you how many have false information on it, but I would say probably half.
Oh, wow.
Or whatever. And, I don't remember exactly what she said. And I said, well, why? She explained. So and she went on to say that, again, this is like putting yourself in the shoes of the person who's creating the document. Mm-hmm. What's the greatest fear that you have if here the government is telling you need to register? War is breaking out. You're an alien. They don't want you here. That's right. One implication. What's the greatest fear? Your greatest fear is that you can't tell them all the information on the form. So my grandfather, like many other immigrants, she said, didn't remember what ship he came over on. So he made it up. Mm. She said she has confirmed that there are many, many people who put down inaccurate information for whatever reasons on those forms, and she believes it's because they were trying not to leave the form blank, because leaving the form blank would raise questions.
Exactly. Boy, and that's good to know. I mean, as we're looking at these documents, it definitely gives you a big grain of salt to put in there with it.
Yeah, I mean, we often say, we all know as researchers and especially genealogists, that just because you have one document saying one thing doesn't mean, I mean, if it's a death certificate, it's probably accurate, but a document like that, maybe you need more than one source on it.
Are you looking to take the next step in your family history research and start recording your family tree in your own genealogy database? Or are you looking to make a switch to a more user-friendly genealogy software program? When my listeners and students ask me which program I prefer, I always recommend RootsMagic. It's the program I decided to make the switch to a couple of years ago, and I am so glad I did. You just won't find a more powerful genealogy software program, and building your family tree is easier than ever with the new RootsMagic 4. With RootsMagic, you can add unlimited facts, find anyone in your database with lightning speed with RootsMagic Explorer, quickly and easily create perfectly formatted sources with the RootsMagic Source Wizard. It makes it so easy. You can create customized reports, and best of all, you can now take RootsMagic wherever your research takes you with RootsMagic to Go, which lets you run RootsMagic directly off your flash drive. And RootsMagic makes it a snap to share your family history. You know how important I think that is. It'll help you publish a book, create stunning wall charts, shareable CDs, even create websites automatically from your data. Really, what are you waiting for? Download your risk-free trial of RootsMagic 4 and see why professionals and beginners alike choose RootsMagic at rootsmagic.com. And it's interesting. I think I got your grandfather and your father mixed up because I started to talk about how big the bunk was. Your grandfather he was an adult. It was your father who the story was. He'd come over as a child, right, under his mom's skirt. But that in itself wasn't the true story.
Well, that was what was always said, and I didn't question it when I heard it growing up, but as an adult, I thought, you're 6 years old. It's pretty hard to hide a 6-year-old under a greatcoat, is it? And it turned out not to be true. I mean, my father was in the hospital for the first 10 days or so, which is, of course, one of the few ways, if you were ailing in some fashion, that you could get sent back.
Right.
And I think that my grandmother made it up as a story because she was trying to hide the fact that she had lost his papers and that he didn't have any evidence of his arrival, and that was a way to explain that. No evidence of his arrival because we didn't go in the normal way. But that, to me, that's those parts of the research, those kinds of little stories are the fun part of doing family history. I never get upset by the discrepancies because the discrepancies probably have a little story behind them.
Exactly. A little mystery.
Here's another little Ancestry.com story. So, when I first started doing my research and I was looking up everybody's name, through Ancestry, I couldn't find my grandparents in 1930, in the 1930 census. They were not listed. And I was using all kinds of variant spellings. So eventually I said, well, I'll put that on the list of things I need to actually find at the National Archive or at, Family History Library. And I got the microfilm for the address, which had taken me a while to get the address of where they were living in 1930, and looked it up. And they were there. What had happened was, it was clear on the document, on the enumerated document. The enumerator had put down that his first name and his last name were identical. Hyman.
Not very imaginative parents. Is that what they're saying?
Well, it's just a mistake.
Yeah.
He had crossed out the last name, which was supposed to be Cohen, but he had not put it in. So there's no last name. It's crossed out. So I told the story for 2 years until last month that my grandfather is not indexed. My grandfather and his family are not indexed in the 1930 census because you can't blame Ancestry. What were they supposed to put down, right?
Right.
I said this at the last Genealogical Society talk that I gave, and I got an email a couple days later from a woman who said, I found your grandfather in the Ancestry records. And what she had discovered was, although it's still a mistake, but it's a fun little story, and I've now included a slide of this in the presentation, the indexers had gone up to the previous last name, a different household, next door.
Oh, okay.
And so my grandfather is in the Ancestry record as Hyman Jacobs. And so are all my my mom and my grandmother and my aunt are all Hyman Jacob. I mean, all have the last name of Jacobs in the Ancestry records. Now, I could write to Ancestry and get this corrected. I could have gotten it corrected before when I just thought that they had no name for him. But I haven't figured out how to do that.
Well, actually, I believe you can make a notation right there on the website so that other people can see it. It doesn't formally change it, but it gives it as a hint of, hey, there's more information here. I'll be in touch with you. I'll let you know how to do it. It's pretty easy.
Well, it's just like anything else. I mean, think of the things we do in the world. Let's say that you had a 99% accuracy rate. You'd say, hey, pretty good, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say it was a 999 accuracy rate, only one error out of 1,000. But when you have Ancestry.com or anything else with 6 million records or 100 million records or whatever, a 1 out of 1,000 error rate is a lot of records.
And very likely at some point will touch your history.
Exactly. All these errors and how to deal with them, I think it's part of the challenge of doing the research that we like to do.
Exactly. Well, I'd love to close with this. I wanted to read a little excerpt here from the book because I want to ask you about it. You wrote, "What I didn't expect as the weeks wore on was that the family would expand to take in a new member." So here you are talking about sharing the initial findings with your family. You said, but that's what happened. As people dipped in and out of the records, as the debates flew about what we knew and what we didn't, and whether we should be digging around the past, Annie gradually became a part of the family consciousness. She was no longer just a name on a hospital record. She was no longer just a secret. Has this experience of gaining a new family member, uncovering this secret, has it made you more interested in discovering other ancestors, maybe family members who came, along much earlier in the family history, but are still nonetheless family members who in some small way probably had an impact on your life? Has that brought to mind an interest in furthering your family history?
Well, there's two things that I would say about that little excerpt you read. I mean, first of all, my goal when I started writing the book was to restore Annie's unknown life to reality, to stop having her be anonymous. And so I felt like I was able to give her back her identity in some way. And that was really important to me because I feel like a lot of people who are shunted aside for one reason or another, that's what happens to them is they kind of lose their identity. The rest of the ancestors that we all have, to be honest, I have a limit as to how much I want to know. Meaning that I run into people who just want to know everybody and everything. And there's this one guy I know who jokes that, he's now related to, 10,000 people.
Right.
There are 10,000 people on his family tree. Well, I can't get my arms around 10,000 people. But yes, I would like to know more about some of my ancestors. One of my great failures in my research is that in the social worker's report on Annie when she was admitted to the hospital in 1940 for the first time, my grandmother was giving her routine family history just as my mom was as we started at the top of the podcast. And she said she had 10 brothers and sisters, or she was one of 10 brothers and sisters. Well, I didn't know any of my grandmother's brothers and sisters. And I desperately wanted to when I was researching the book because I felt that if she were in touch with any of them, she would have told them about Annie because my grandmother didn't keep Annie a secret with her generation of friends. And I might have learned something about Annie that I don't I didn't know then, and I still don't know now. I was never able to find any of those brothers and sisters. And I won't, you don't have time for me to tell you how hard I tried. I did something that I thought was brilliant, and it didn't work. I'll tell you that one thing. But and those are not people who are that ancient in the family.
Right.
These are people of my grandmother's generation, and I still haven't found them. The one thing I tried is that because my grandparents both came from the small town that you mentioned, Radzivilov in Ukraine, what is now Ukraine, what was then Russia, and there was clearly a family history there, and people didn't move around as much and all that. I thought, well, a lot of these towns, when the immigrants come over, they start their own immigrant aid society, or
right.
they join an immigrant group from their hometown because they're looking to meet people from where they came from. So I found out there was a Radzivillar association in New York, and that the association is now defunct, but they had left their papers to an archive. And so I hustled up to New York to look at all of the papers. Mm-hmm. And I find that the vice president of this association has the same exact last name as my grandmother.
Oh
my grandmother's maiden name. So I'm thrilled, of course,
right.
because how could they not be related? They're from the same small town. It's not a really, really small town, but it's no bigger than 10,000 people. They must be related. But, I made a family tree up for that guy's family. If anyone would like it, there was. It's not my family.
Yeah. Oh, and you didn't find any other leads in those papers to any of these siblings?
Well, I talked to, even though they somehow, at least we couldn't figure out how they were related, I nonetheless went ahead and found the the descendants for that man, because they might know anyway. I mean, it's still, as we've been talking about throughout the podcast, it's still a cluster. But they didn't. And my cousin Anna, who we spoke about earlier, who came from Radzivilov as well, the one who survived the war, she didn't know my grandmother's sisters and brothers. She had heard about one she thought was living in Israel, but I didn't find her. So I haven't tried since then, after a number of other forays into other attempts to look for them through court records and other things. I just gave up, not because I didn't want to find them, but just because I felt at some point that it was that the amount of energy wasn't worth the return.
Right.
And as I found other people who knew Annie, friends of my mom, who could tell me about Annie, I felt like, well, I could always find more, but I found enough.
Oh, you have suffered from what we all suffer from in family history, which is getting pulled in 10 different directions. And good for you for having the discipline to stay focused on the mystery at hand. We certainly all benefit from that because of this terrific book. Again, it's called Annie's Ghost. And I've got 10,000 more questions I could ask you, because I'm fascinated by what you bring to the genealogical search in terms of your storytelling and your journalism background. But of course, you said you're working on a new book, so we got to let you go so you can spend some time on that. I hope you'll promise to come back and tell us about it when you get it all published, and I'm fascinated to learn about the research strategies that you use to find out that story.
I'd love to do that if once somebody tells me that they're willing to publish it, which I hope they will after I write my book proposal. I'll be eager to talk about it, as all authors are once they've actually done something as opposed to imagined it.
Of course. Well, wonderful. Stephen Luxenberg, thank you so much for joining us here on the Genealogy Gems podcast.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. It sounds like you have a great show, and I'm glad to have been a member of it.
I can't tell you how much I enjoyed reading Annie's Ghosts. This book inspired me, gave me concrete ideas for pursuing my own family history research, and kept me on the edge of my chair. What could be better? If you do decide to pick up a copy of Annie's Ghost, whether in paperback or for your Kindle, you can help support and make this free podcast available for everyone by doing your shopping through the Amazon search box on the homepage of my website at genealogygems.com, or by clicking the linked image of the book that you'll find in the show notes for this episode, which is number 121. And the Amazon button is back on the free Genealogy Gems toolbar. Yay! So you can get there that way as well. But no matter which of those avenues that you use, we really do appreciate your support of the Genealogy Gems podcast. Thank you so much. And I hope that you'll keep us in mind as you start doing your holiday and your Christmas shopping. If you're doing much of it online, as I know I am, I hope that you will do so through our Amazon links and the other links that you'll find in the store section of the website, because all of that supports the free podcast. And thanks again to Steve Luxenberg for taking the time out to be on the show. I can't wait to hear about his next book. Can you? Before we wrap up this episode, I have a very special little segment for you. It's from my friend, Sunny Morton. She's the author of the brand new book, My Life and Times, a guided journal for collecting your stories. Sunny's going to be joining me here on the podcast for the next few episodes, sharing some ideas with us on how you can capture your life and times. Here's Sunny.
Genealogists about writing their own life stories should be easy, right? Many of us consider our lives a part of the legacy we want to preserve. But I meet plenty of family historians who have never even considered writing about themselves. Today I want to share 3 reasons we should be recording our lives, even as we research our forebears. First, personal history is personally rewarding. It can give us the same buzz as genealogy. We research our own memories. We analyze them and learn more about ourselves and our loved ones. For example, think about yourself as a teenager. Was there a time you were especially kind to someone? What about a time you were not? How would you describe your personality at that age? What did you think of yourself? What do you think about your teenage self now? What did you believe about right and wrong as a teenager? Whose values influenced you most during those years? These questions and more come from my new book, My Life and Times, a guided journal for collecting your stories. These questions prompt memories, but also your analysis of them. That's the so what factor in both personal history and genealogy, the meaning we find or create out of life's experiences and relationships. Second, writing our own stories makes us better family historians. After we've turned the microscope on our own lives, our research questions become more perceptive, our investigation more detailed, our analysis more thoughtful, our judgment more compassionate. Also, as a genealogy writing instructor, I'm a big fan of including our own voices and experiences in family history writing. It usually makes our writing a lot more interesting. We can use our own experiences as springboards for talking about ancestors. We might not know what they were thinking, but we can react to their choices and experiences for them. It doesn't embellish the historical record one bit to say, I can only imagine how it felt. Not everyone is comfortable writing history this way, but including your own stories is definitely one way to get your family to read what you write. Finally, when we share our stories, we give a priceless and totally unique gift. Nobody tells our own stories like we do. I learned this a few years ago when my grandmother gave me a handwritten book full of her history. I love this book and the courage and love that went into creating it. Her handwriting is now as precious to me as the sound of her voice. I feel like I've known her at all ages, not just as a grandmother. I feel closer to her and confident that her voice and life experiences will be there for my children to enjoy as adults. In the coming weeks, I'll be talking more about what stories to tell, jogging our memories and stealing other people's memories, family secrets and other stuff we're not supposed to say, and finding meaning in our memories. I hope you'll check out passages from my new book at www.sunnymorton.com and my personal history blog, Your Life in 5 Minutes, at www.yourlifein5minutes.com, which helps busy people tell their stories.
Profile America, Saturday, November 5th. Today marks the birthday of a man who literally changed the look of the 20th century. Raymond Loewy was known as the father of streamlining. His designs are part of American life, from the familiar Coca-Cola bottle to the paint scheme on Air Force One and the interior of the Concorde. He designed the first streamlined railroad train and post-war Studebakers, the first cars in which fenders were an integral part of the body. Loewy's philosophy was that between two products of equal quality, the best designed one will sell better. Today, styling is a key element in drawing customers to the nearly 25,000 new car dealers in the U.S. and in selling almost $688 billion worth of new cars and trucks annually. Profile America is in its 15th year as a public service of the U.S. Census Bureau.
Thanks for joining me for Genealogy Gems podcast episode number 121. If you have any questions or comments, I hope you'll drop me a line at genealogygemspodcast@gmail.com or leave me a recorded message at 925-272-4021. Thanks so much for listening, friend. I'll talk to you soon.